cigars all around. Cheers, y'all.
Well. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this fine little program known all over the globe as the world-famous Smoking and Toasting. Hi, Mom. Nice to have you guys on board.
Hi, Mom.
For show number. Thank you. I don't know whether that's the lag, Ian, or whether you were just, occupied there. But
I was a little behind. I'm trying to share this on Facebook right now, but I'm not finding the link.
Oh, okay. Well, I did find it, so maybe go back and reload your Facebook app again, and you should be able to find it. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's Smoking and Toasting, and we are very excited to be here and very excited to welcome, for show number 182, our special guest, Dan Crowell from Glenmorangie. And Dan, welcome to the show. It is so nice to have you on, and good to see you again, my friend.
Well, thank you very much. It's I am excited as hell to be a part of this. I've been looking forward to chatting with you guys for quite some time. It's been a while since we've had a chance to hang out together in any capacity or even to chat. So this is a very effective cure for my cabin fever right this minute. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, as we've been talking about the virtual drinking together experience, it's not quite as good as being there in the same room, pouring things into each other's glasses and what have you. But I will say it's a close second. And with that in mind, let me take care of a couple of pieces of business here. First is that we are brought to you by B&B Butchers and Restaurant at 1814 Washington Ave in Houston, and in the shops at Clear Fork and Fort Worth, BB Italia on Memorial in Houston, BB Lemon on Washington Ave, the Annie Cafe and Bar on Post Oak Boulevard in Houston. By the way, if you are in the greater Houston area, my wife just showed me a thing about this today. The Annie Cafe and Bar is doing a special food truck version of their amazing food and stuff that's coming up. So go to their website and check it out, because they will be opening up a food truck. I don't think it's going to be open all the time, but it'll be for a specific time and serving. She read me off the menu, and I was like, oh my God, I've never had food truck food like that. That's going to be spectacular. So go to their website. Just go to Google and search Annie Cafe and Bar, and you can find out the details and figure out how to become a part of it, because you basically drive up and boom, they give you the stuff. So it's a pretty awesome thing. So welcome. In addition to the sponsor information, we were talking about getting together virtually, and I wanted to pass along that we are doing our next Smoking and Toasting virtual Smoke Fest this Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Time. And so what that will involve is we'll be on Zoom, and I'll pass that info on to you later on the show and exactly how to meet up with us. But it's the same login information and meeting ID as last time, and we'll all just be on Zoom smoking and drinking together. It'll be a blast. So, and we
had a blast with it last time.
Yeah, everyone and anyone who wants to be a part of this, you are invited, and we would love to hang and smoke with you. So this is show number 182. Today we are going to be exploring whiskey cask finishes with Dan Crowell. And this was Dan's idea, by the way, when we started talking about trying to arrange to have Dan on the show today. He was the one that came up with this idea of, why don't we explore cask finishes and explore several and try to do some different brands and see how they compare and contrast with the different kinds of finishes. So, Ian, I see some bottles behind you. Maybe you could tell me where you're starting once we get into it.
Oh, I got this barrel full of fun here. Well, we were talking about different casks and stuff going on, and I am a huge fan of sherry cask finish on a scotch. I think it's an absolute wonderful thing. So therefore, I picked 4 sherry cask finishes out of my selection. The classic Macallan 12 matured in sherry oak casks. We're probably all pretty familiar with this. This is a standard. As you can see, it's not my first time to try it. I brought the Balvenie 15-year aged in sherry cask. This is a particularly particular favorite.
Yeah. Hello, that's awesome.
Yeah. This is a particularly special bottle. My wife bought this one for me. This was well, you won't be able to find this one anymore, but this is the Glen Roenick 17-year single cask, and this is. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, was that a limited time? Is that why that's not available?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Then we got the last, but not least, Arvalor Abunda, which I believe we've had on the show before. And this is matured in Spanish Oloroso sherry butts, and that's also rather classic bottle right there. So that's what I brought today for tasting, along with a couple beers.
Yes, and we'll get to the beers in a moment. Dan, what are you looking to taste today?
Well, I brought a few. What I wanted to do was to look at how three different distilleries use three different sort of sherry grades or classifications. So in the one case, I'm having a little bit of this is the 91 Kimchi Distillers edition. It's I don't know if you can see that label or not.
Yeah, it's great.
It's a 14-year-old product, and if this sort of goes to Diageo's general MO, it'll see its last 4 to 6 months in Amontillado sherry coming out of Glenmorangie. So that's one. Lowland, Glenmorangie is a kind of a surprising lowland distillery. Lowlands have a reputation for being sort of light and grassy and aperitif-y. But the way the Glenmorangie is made, and it is to a certain degree, but the way the Glenmorangie is made kind of flies in the face of that a little bit with the use of warm tubs and really severely descending line arms off the spirit still. So that's one. Two is an old favorite, an old friend of mine. The very old version of this would now be Glenmorangie La Santa. But prior to 2007, it would have looked like this. This is Glenmorangie Sherry would finish, bottled at 43 ABV. This was back when the only sherry cask used in that bottling was Oloroso. Now, if you have a current bottle of La Santa, it would be a combination of Oloroso and PX sherry cask finishing.
Is the juice the same? So it's not the same. You just answered the question. The finish is different. Okay.
Yeah, bottled at the same ABV, though. So 43 ABV on that one, just like today's La Santa would be. And then I was fortunate last year to visit Bunnahabhain, and I picked up this. Let me see if I can get it close enough for you. This is I had this bottle at the distillery for me. This is an 11-year-old Palo Cortado finish, bottled at 55.6 ABV, and this I just cracked. So I haven't had it since that day in August of 2019 when I visited Bunnahabhain. So
wow.
These are three different looks from three different regions, from three different distilleries using three different types of sherry cask. So I'm really looking forward to digging in.
By the way, Dan, I'll just mention we had Doc's on last week, Greg Duxakis from Plantation Rum, and he chose to show off a little bit by setting his camera up in front of his wall of rums. And I've noticed that you've taken a more modest approach. Yeah. I've noticed you've taken a more modest approach, but I have a feeling you could probably wow us pretty solidly.
Well, it's the way that they're stored is sort of in cupboards and such, so that it's not a super impressive look. But there are a few bottles hanging out. I went for the minimalist background this time, but I've seen a few folks on Zoom and Skype and stuff with these massive collections behind them, and I'm not one of those guys.
I'll be going port.
He's not trying to compensate. That's what he's saying.
I'll be going port cask today. I'll be tasting the Dalmore Portwood Reserve, which I believe, Ian, we have done this one on the show before. But I haven't been back to this bottle in a good while, so it'll be interesting and fun to see what that tastes like, how it holds up in the tasting. And then this is a bottle that Dan may have seen before. Ian, I know you've seen before. In fact, I think one of your visits to my house is the reason that the line is not up here, but is instead
there's a good
here.
possibility of that. I had a bottle of that about a month ago. I did the bottle kill on that one, and then last week I killed my bottle of La Santa that I had because I had, just a little over 2 drinks left, and that made for a good evening.
Oh, good.
Well, the Quinta Raban I'm looking forward to because I already am quite familiar with that one. And this one I've never had. This one I got especially for our tasting today, but it came highly recommended. This is the Arran, the single malt Scotch whiskey. I know you're really supposed to say the Arran, but I always feel like I sound kind of dorky when I do that. So, but this is their port cask. We've had, I believe, the 18 Ian on the show before, but I have not tasted this at all. All I did was take the top off that, as you can see. And I often get accused, by the way, of bringing bottles to the show that are already
used bottles.
Yes, but this one, as you can see by the top there, we've not been in this. So looking forward to that. What about beers, Ian? What are you going to be tasting today?
All right. So I found this, and I think that you would appreciate this. Mm-hmm. I saw it. The damn packaging was so cute. That's right. I used the word cute that I had to buy it.
Oh.
It's a little snack by 11 Below.
That's right. It's a Pilsner, right?
It is. A little snack Pilsner. I'll talk about it when we get to it. That's pretty fun. So I saw that. I thought it would be a lot of fun to try. I've been enjoying some of the more craft on the lighter side beers, which you don't always see. And then just to balance it off, because there are times when I need a beer that's over 9%. I brought North Coast Brewing, Brother Polonius.
There, I'll say that again, Ian. There are times when you need a beer over 9%. Would that be the times that you're drinking beer?
That's right. That's right. When you're drinking a beer, that's one of those times where it's a good time to have a beer that's over 9%.
Well, I did something a little different this time. I was thinking about, it looks quite delicious. I was thinking about how a lot of people are in the situation that they may not be able to get to their favorite beverage store as often as possible. And we do want to encourage you to do that, or to use any of the delivery services and keep some of our smaller craft breweries, alive and kicking during this time. But if you are at the grocery store and you're looking at what their choices are and you see this one, you might wonder, is that any good? And I don't know, because I haven't had one, but we'll try it today. Stella Artois Midnight Lager. So this is a black.
Interesting.
Stella. Now, of course, this is a AB InBev product, but I promise to be fair and tell you if I like it or not. So I do have a Stella Artois from time to time. It's not my favorite beer of that style, but it's one of those that if I'm out at a restaurant or something like that and looking at the list, it can sometimes be the best thing on the list in terms of how my taste goes. But I have not tried the black, so I'm looking forward to that. And then, Ian, I wish I had you here to share this one with me, because I'll also be tasting something that I saw for the first time and I'm very excited about. Rogue, the brewery that does Dead Guy Ale. And they
I love Dead Guy Ale. You know that.
They also have a distillery where they do the Rogue whiskey. They have come out with a hazy IPA called Bat Squatch. And I'll be explaining. Yeah, of course they did. So I'll be explaining exactly what Bat Squatch is and why they named it that as we get into that one as well. So looking forward to all of that today. And last but not least, Ian, cigar time. What are you going to smoke for us today?
Oh, I'm pretty excited about this one. This is the Fuente Extra Añejo, and I haven't lit that up yet. I was just waiting to talk about it. I can't wait to have this. This comes out of the top drawer in my humidor, where all my more special occasion cigars go. And I figured, yes, well, talking Scotch with Dan, I figure that's as special as it gets.
Oh.
So here we are. We're about to light this up. What did you bring today?
We both went a little old school, and I will admit I've already lit mine. It has new packaging since the last time I smoked one of these, but it has been a very long time since I lit up a Partagas Black. And this is the, if you haven't seen what the newer bands look like on this originally had a band that looked like the classic Partagas band, except it was just a black color instead of the usual Partagas. The Partagas has actually been repackaging all of their products, and so this is what the black winds up looking like. This is the Torah, and it is the black label Magnifico Torah. And the thing I noticed about this one, even before I lit it up, is how we often describe the pre-lights on cigars as being earthy, and this certainly had that. But this cigar, it almost smells like a more fermented earthiness than a lot of the earthy cigars. Usually, when I say earthy, it's almost like a soil kind of a very pleasant, rich soil kind of vibe. In this case, it's earthiness in a way that makes it really kind of emphasized. And of course, Maduro is fermented in a certain way, but much more of a fermented aroma than most Maduros. When you light it up, you don't necessarily get that right off the bat, but I'm only about a half an inch into it here, and so I'll let you know. It is it's very pleasant, very easy to smoke, and I'm guessing it's going to run probably like a straight medium. But again, we'll let you know as this goes, and it should be, I think, an interesting thing to go along with the port finish stuff that I'll be trying. So
that's what I tried to choose. I also brought a backup just in case I finished that first cigar, and I brought this one solely to make you jealous.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm green with envy here. I don't know if you can tell because of the color correction
Partagas
on
Series
the screen,
D number 4.
Yeah. All right. So we both have a Partagas. That's except yours comes from Cuba. So let me ask you, Dan, and I do want to ask you some questions about the spirits industry and how what you do is different from maybe what it used to be, or before quarantine time. But we'll get to that in a minute. Before we do, we've got a lot of tasting, so I thought maybe you could give us a recommendation. Would the best way to taste, in doing these compare and contrast, would it be to go like one at a time, or should one of us taste all the way through our selections in a straight line?
I think since we've all got some pretty contrasting whiskeys in front of each of us, it might make sense to do that's a good question. Maybe one at a time would work a little bit better, just so that you're not necessarily bombarding your palates with a bunch of stuff simultaneously. So I guess I'd recommend by the time you get to your second whiskey, you're just going to try to sort of freeze frame how you felt about the first one, hold on to that for a bit, try the second one, and chat through the comparison and contrast notes flying through your head at any given time would be kind of my recommendation. I don't know if you guys feel differently though. We can certainly go. We can go say 3 at a time or whatever works best for you.
Good. Let's do it that way. And why don't you go ahead and get us started? We'll come back to some of the questions I mentioned, but let's go ahead and get the tasting started. And Ian, you can figure out what you want to taste first, and you'll go next.
All right. I'm going to kick off with my Glenmorangie Distillers edition. Lowland malts have a reputation for being a bit aperitif-y, so I figured that's as good a place to start as any. My two my two mainland whiskeys, Glenmorangie and Glenmorangie, my two Glens, of course, 2 different regions, but the same ABV. Glenmorangie is going to be a little bit older than the Glenmo. So I'm just going to throw a little bit of this back. This is going to be neat. And again, this one sees not as long a finish as the Glenmo does, but a bit of finish in Amontillado sherry. So that's going to be not quite as oxidized as Oloroso, a little bit more oxidized than Palo Cortado, but on the dry to medium dry side of things. When I'm trying to evaluate a whiskey based on whether I think it has some sherry influence, of course, I'm looking at color first, and because this is an Amontillado finish, the color isn't necessarily, I don't know how well you can see that light's not necessarily great, but if I had to look at this blind, I might, not blind, but not knowing what it is, I might vacillate a little bit between, well, this may have just seen a whole lot of time in ex-bourbon oak, or it may have seen it just a hit of sherry on the end. Then I'd go in, try to evaluate the nose in terms of looking for a nuttiness, looking for a dried fruit characteristic, possibly looking for tobacco and leather in progressively older expressions of whiskeys that have seen some time in sherry oak. So I'm just going to dive into the aromatics here and see what comes out. Some really interesting, some real mild, lighter tobacco notes, not necessarily big old robust cigar type tobacco notes, but a nice light leaf happening in there. Some, maybe even some dried cherry, certainly some nuttiness going on, possibly a tiny bit of what might be referenced on the nose as a little bit of savory, some honey happening. So I'm going to drop a little onto the palate and see what happens. And there it is. The sherry notes are a bit more pronounced here. What happens, and this can sometimes serve to confuse. It certainly has served to confuse me many times in the past. The idea of restricting copper contact for distillate vapors, either encouraging or restricting copper contact for distillate vapors. In this case, because the stills at Glenmorangie have the steeply descending line arms, and it's going into a shell into a worm tub condenser. What they're looking for is to shorten up the conversation that the distillate vapors and the copper are having. So in the new make, that might show up as a direct sulfur reference. But once it's 14 years in a cask, and at least partially that time would have been spent in a Amontillado sherry, the sulfur doesn't show up as sulfur anymore. It shows up as a sort of a coat tree for other interesting flavors. So the sulfur evolves and fades, but forms the backdrop or the kind of the peg wall of loads of different flavor characteristics, including those that come out of sherry casks. So this chewiness that's coming out of this, it's really quite good. Chewiness happening here, Demerara sugar going on. The nuttiness plays nicely. It's that savory, slightly briny note. It isn't the typical like aggressive meaty characteristic that you'd typically expect to find in a worm tub condensed whiskey. But this is 14 years old, so that's had a chance to sort of evolve into a richer, deeper nuttiness. I thoroughly love this whiskey. I haven't had it for a good year or so, and now I remember why I bought it. It's really good.
Ian, I don't know about you, but I have never felt so inadequate as a taster on a program as I feel now after Dan's opening parlay. I'm going to just go.
I appreciate Dan. He's very thorough.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll just let you know my review will be something like, yeah, I'm getting some notes of wood and maybe some cherry. And that'll be in contrast to what Dan just gave it. So, Dan, maybe you can jump in and supplement mine.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Whiskey good.
Whiskey good. By the way, as Ian's getting ready to do his, now that the drinking has begun, I do want to start a new feature on the show, and it's called The Drinking Story. And what The Drinking Story is it will be a story that I've been able to come across. In this case, my wife forwarded this one to me. That actually has nothing to do with drinking, but is a story that's at least been reported by one of the news outlets, and that's good to pass along while you are drinking. So, Ian, before you get started, you can kind of check out your notes there, and let me just pass along today's Smoking and Toasting drinking story. From this last week, from Washington, a woman's life was saved by her silicone breast implants after she was shot in the chest at close range while walking down a street in Toronto, according to doctors. The 30-year-old woman's left breast implant deflected the bullet away from her vital organs into the other breast implant, according to a study that was published last week in medical journals. The incident actually occurred in 2018, and it's one of only a handful of cases. So what that means is there are more than just this one, where a woman was saved by her breast implants and is believed to be the first involving silicone ones. So there's your drinking story, Ian. as a backdrop for tasting.
I'm absolutely flabbergasted by that. I don't know what to say, except so this is our classic Macallan 12 right here. This one comes in at 43%. On my nose, I pick up the classic, the maltiness. There's a little bit of what's really when I was listening to Dan talk, and he was waxing quite poetic. I noticed something on mine. The tobacco, when he mentioned the tobacco notes, were very interesting. I thought, wow, I do smell a little bit of that, but I also smell a little almost tea leaf in here, right there on the nose. There's some fruity characteristics going on. There's no smoke, none of the darker kind of flavors that I would normally detect.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the tea leaf thing. One of the things that I tend to run into in Glenmorangie 18 specifically, which sees some of its life in Oloroso Sherry Cask, is a distinct tea leaf note. And oddly enough, the way that those two distilleries produce their output is radically different. The still size and shape, Macallan and Glenmorangie are so completely different that if you go and tour Macallan, one of the things that they show you in one of the stations that the tourists stop and look at is the schematic of the Macallan still compared to the schematic of the Glenmorangie still. So that they even use what they do and what we do as an indicator of contrast. So it's interesting to me that tea leaf thing that you could probably ascribe to extractives from the oak and from the residual sherry in the Oloroso cask is playing out on your palate in Macallan the way that I think it probably would for me, at least in part, with Glenmorangie 18.
Well, this the sherry cask finish on this, like when you, especially on the retro hail, after you take a sip, first off, this is a very it's very quick on the palate. This comes in and clears the whole palate really fast, and then the retro hail on this is just nothing but this great grapey sherry, dark kind of fruit thing going on that I didn't get on the nose when I was just smelling it. But the tea leaf is very present at the very beginning of the taste, and then you have this malt round profile right in the middle. You have a little snap of heat that goes on, and then everything clears out of the palate, and then you have that great whiskey hug that comes right back. And then as you do that delicious and wonderful retro hail. And for those of you out there who don't know what the retro hail is, take a sip of a whiskey or a spirit, swallow, and then breathe gently out of your nose after you swallow, and you'll pick up, another bunch of flavors that you may not have picked up in the initial taste of it. And that's where this thing, I think, really shines, other than just being a fantastic whiskey on its own.
You mentioned the tea leaf vibe. I'm getting a little of that, and I have not tried the whiskey yet, but getting a little bit of that just before the whiskey tasting out of this Spartacus Black. It's a little of that fermentation flavor that I mentioned earlier is starting to come through, and a really distinct sweetness that I don't remember from when I tried one of these before, but it has been a very long time. So, but there's definitely some tea leaf, very rich kind of almost like an oriental tea vibe that comes through a little bit on this cigar.
It's an interesting thing. I'm just sitting and thinking about, flavor sources and where you might be able to track those down in terms of where it physically came from, what part of the either fermentation, distillation, or maturation it showed up in, and how it evolved over the course of time. Of course, tea leaves and tobacco plants and oak are all plants, and plants share certain aromatic hydrocarbons as part of their internal structure, phenols and ketones and so on and so forth. So there is a natural sort of tapestry being built there by broken down or progressively breaking down plant structures and either having them be rendered into smoke or leached into distillate, but showing up on the palate nonetheless.
Dan, just a question. Clearly you've got a pretty deep education on whiskeys and flavors and, the distillation process. Is this something you learned on the job? How do you train for this? Are there classes that somebody who wants to do what you do can take to learn more?
Yeah, there are programs, definitely. The most probably comprehensive and technically challenging one out there is the IBD, the Institute of Brewing and Distilling program that starts with the GCD, the General Certificate in Distilling, moves into diploma, and then the third level is Master Whiskey. And those are I've passed the GCD, but diploma is an incredibly rigorous set of benchmarks that you've got to clear. And the IBD program is really built for people that are working in distilleries, that are apprenticing as master distillers, and so on and so forth. So after a certain point, you really do need to be working in a distillery for the study and the practical application of that study to line up and make it make sense. These folks that have just in the last year or so launched the Council of Whiskey Masters out in California, that program is actually turning out to be a pretty solid and rigorous program for folks in the trade on my side of things, on the education and advocacy side. So I'm working through that process right now with the Council of Whiskey Masters. I've passed level 1. I'm working on level 2 now. So yeah, there are programs that you can pursue. You don't have to necessarily be in the industry on any given level. You can take this stuff, as anyone at any, as an enthusiast for the category or whatever. But the Council of Whiskey Masters, I think, has done well. Those guys at the Stave and Thief Society, the Executive Bourbon Steward session is a really good one for American whiskeys. So yeah, there are programs and structures that you can follow to make the category, the dissemination of the information, the vital information within that category, and the enjoyment of that category more sort of enriching and thorough, for sure.
That's great. It sounds really fascinating and kind of hard.
Well, there's a bit of that. This is my notes so far, and I don't know if you can see this, but this is my notes on this is my notebook for level 2 of the Council of Whiskey Masters exam, which I think is the first one was called Certified Scotch Professional, so CSP. The next one will be CSW, so Certified Specialist of Whiskey. And then the third level will be Master of Scotch, and then the fourth level will be Master of Whiskey. So they haven't actually, the first Master of Scotch exam has yet to be administered. It's that new. So before all this stuff hit, it was scheduled for May of 2021, and I'm just trying to stay on schedule for that. And I don't know if that's been delayed or not, but that'll be, by the time that exam is administered, it's all an oral exam live in front of the basically the board of directors for the Council of Whiskey Masters, which would include the luminaries, Dave Broom, Charlie McLean, Lou Bryson. So theoretically, I would have to stand in front of those guys and at least attempt to pretend that I know something while not stammering and choking on my tongue and sweating through my clothes.
I don't see you having a problem. And by the way, just as far as your notes are concerned, those are way more detailed than my college notes, and look like they had a lot fewer doodles. Just with an observation.
Right. Oh well, thank you. Yeah, it's study from home stuff.
So I'm going Port Cask today, and opening with the Dalmore Portwood Reserve. It's a Highland single malt. It's 46.5 ABV, and they describe it as a special assemblage of whiskey matured in American white oak ex-bourbon barrels, which is then finessed by aged tawny port pipes, which were hand-selected from the W&J Graham's vineyard in Portugal. And one of the first things I notice about it is from a color standpoint, being aged in the American white oak ex-bourbon barrels. I don't know if that's where the color comes from, but this is definitely a deeper color, much more like an American bourbon than most single malts that you're going to see out of Scotland. So it's definitely a deeper color. On the nose, I'm getting almost a bourbon vibe out of it, to be honest, on the nose. And there's definitely some coffee in there. I haven't done a tasting yet, so let me join you since I'm the last to enjoy the whiskey here. So, wow. And I have tasted this before, but I don't really remember that well what I got out of it the last time around. Distinct bourbon and coffee notes in there. There's some cherry, maybe a little bit of dried fruit on this, and even on the finish, even some orange, like orange peel zest. Ooh, nice. Type of a vibe comes through. So it's, to be honest, it's a bit more complicated. You know how when you taste a great single malt, sometimes you've got those one or two flavors that really are predominant, and it's the others are much more in the background. You have to really sit and kind of think through them. This one, you kind of get the flavors almost sort of all at once, which is very interesting. Nice whiskey hug. Good 10, 15 seconds after. But what's I think most interesting and maybe surprising for me was that orange zest, which I could still kind of get a little bit of on my tongue. Dan, when the finish is done with tawny port pipes, what's the reason for doing it that way as opposed to maybe letting it rest in a barrel that held port?
If you're sourcing your cask, if your cask sourcing is coming from Portugal, then you're essentially going to be receiving one of two vessels. One of them is the port pipe, which would be a 660-ish liter cask. If you saw one, if you were standing next to one, it'd stand about probably 5 feet high. It'd look a little bit more. I'm sure you've seen a sherry butt, and sherry butts are pretty pudgy. Port pipe looks like a big wooden cigar. It's a little bit wider than that, but it's more elongated than a sherry butt with a little bit more internal volume. So you're either getting that, or you're getting barriques. You're getting 225-liter toasted French oak barriques out of Portugal, and they're using both. If this, and I'm guessing, if it was Graham's Tawny, I'm guessing it was a traditional pipe. So if you're using a port pipe, you're going to obviously, just like using sherry wood, you're looking to extract the evaporated residual solids that were embedded in the wood when the alcohol and water content evaporated. So that's where at least some of that color is coming from. Those fruit, there's darker and richer and more intense fruit notes coming from that tawny port cask. The reason that Sir Richard Patterson, Dalmore, he wouldn't have left that whiskey entirely in port pipe the entire time, because it would have been a little too extractive. And if it was French oak barrique, it might have been a little too tannic as well. So you're going to hit the front end of the extended front end of that with ex-bourbon oak as a more using ex-bourbon oak more for what the bourbon took out than for what a specific bourbon left behind. So an ex-bourbon oak cask still has a lot of flavor element to it, just not quite so much as being imparted on straight bourbon or straight rye. So you're gonna get the creamy toasted coconut, sea salt, caramel, vanilla, honey notes out of ex-bourbon oak. A lovely rich roundness, but not too much extractive overlay. So then Richard's going to use that tawny port pipe just as an ending overlay. That's finishing in general, just as an ending overlay as opposed to if you took like the concept of Macallan 12. Macallan 12 is defined by full maturation in Oloroso sherry cask. So the way that they create that distillate is on purpose meaty and sulfury, so that in 12 years, the meaty sulfury, like I'd mentioned, becomes the coat rack for all of these very cool but rich and robust notes coming out of sherry wood. By contrast, if you tried to do that with Glenmorangie distillate for full maturation in sherry, you'd lose the spirit essence to the wood. So Richard's really just trying to strike a balance between what the distillate brought, what the maturation and ex-bourbon brought in terms of the natural progression of that distillate, and then what kind of an interesting brooch could be pinned to its lapel that comes out of the tawny port.
Ian, do you see what I did there? By pulling Dan into my review, that was a great review of this. Honestly, that's easily the best whiskey review I've ever done.
So, I'm pretty sure you just Huckleberry Finned him right into it.
Totally. Ian, how
painting
is
this fence is fun.
Ian, how is the Macallan working with your cigar?
So I was going to bring this back up. The Macallan and the cigar are an interesting pair, because I think my cigar, even though it's a Fuente, it's kind of on the bigger side of what Fuente makes, and I think my cigar is really pulling out that tea and malt flavors in here. I get a little bit like, you talked about, like, the more you taste it, the more things you pull out of it. So doing an immediate review after the first sip is always an interesting thing. But after you've had a few sips, just reminding myself, I'm getting a lot more of that tea leaf. So they kind of interact with each other. I'm getting a lot more tea leaf and dark fruit, especially on the finish, and the oak is coming out nice. But it makes the cigar, like, the cigar has an inherent chocolatiness, a little bit of pepper, and it has a lot of coffee to it. And it makes the cigar very coffee-oriented. It pulls out, so, like, I don't get the sweetness of the cigar as much because of the whiskey, but it makes it a little more coffee-oriented. They go very nicely together. I don't know that it would be my premium pick together, but they do go very nicely together. And also the finish of the cigar kind of picks up some of that tea leaf flavor, and that's kind of interactive. So it makes for an interesting combination, if you ask me.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, and I will say, even now that I've had a little cigar and gone back to the Dalmore, again, the flavors have really shifted on that as well, and the sweeter flavors are less pronounced. But I am definitely still picking up the coffee and picking up a little of that vanilla that you're likely to get from a bourbon. It's really quite good, and I will say I'm enjoying this. Maybe it's the whiskey, but enjoying this Partagas Black much more than I remember enjoying the Black Label before. So, cheers to Partagas. I'm going to move us forward here because we've got a lot to taste. And I'm going to go ahead and open my Stella Artois Midnight Lager Black.
Ooh, very nice.
So I'm actually very curious about this because I don't know that I've ever tasted a Stella other than your regular Stella. So,
well, I'll point out that the regular Stella, look at the color of that.
Yeah.
I'll point out that the regular Stella, if you're in a restaurant or a bar that has only the usual suspects, but they do have Stella, that's the beer that I'll choose.
I have a couple.
If they don't have a Sam Adams, they don't have something else. That's generally one of the ones I'll choose.
I have a couple of friends that Stella is actually their go-to. They love that particular sort of Belgian flavor of Stella Artois, and they feel like it's a lot more flavorful than their, than most other, sort of mainstream beers. Look at the color on that thing.
That's pretty dark. Color. It's got a cola kind of color to it almost.
Well, I will say on the nose, it doesn't smell anything like a regular Stella that has that that sort of Stella bitterness vibe going to it. It doesn't. I don't get any of that. It's wow. Ian, this is almost like a. And then it's for version in a coffee tasting porter. It doesn't have the same mouthfeel as it's got more of that lager mouthfeel, but it certainly has got those deep, dark roasted notes. I'm gonna tell you, it's quite good, particularly for a macro brew. And I believe this is a limited that's not available. I don't know if it'll say that on the bottle or not. It's 5.4%. Doesn't say that much. But listen, it's
just from this
good.
perspective, it looks very carbonated too.
Yes, more carbonation than you would expect from the porter as well, which influences the mouthfeel, but not more than you would expect from a good lager. So, impressive. That definitely punched above the weight class I was expecting, to be honest with you. I was expecting something, more in the lines of a Stella, but just with some of the darker flavors. But that's I got to say, pleasantly surprised on that one. Where are you headed, Ian, beer-wise?
Well, I've got the 11 Below. That's local here in Houston. It's the little snack.
I love the graphic.
Yeah, the graphic just has a picture for those of you who just listen to this and don't actually watch it, Josh. It has a lunchbox full with beer and then a sandwich that looks like it has 2 pieces of bread, a couple bits of lettuce, and a couple beers in it. I'll hold that up to the camera again.
That's the right kind of lunchbox there.
And this is a Pilsner at 4.5%, 11 Below Brewing. It says, have a snack, trash is whack. Sometimes you just need a little something to hold you over when a snack attack comes calling. With its clean German Pilsner malt and noble hop character, Little Snack was built to crush your cravings in the heat of summer. It might be small, but it's a whole snack. So,
love it.
This to me seems like as a Pilsner.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Once again,
does that sound good? As a Pilsner, this is meant to be a lighter drinking, and they even say, for summer. So, interestingly enough, it's got a great head on it. It's got classic straw-colored Pilsner color to it. It smells good. It smells like fresh beer. If that makes any sense, it smells like fresh.
Totally.
Have you ever? You guys have all been in breweries. You know that smell of all the hops and the barley and everything inside of a brewery when you walk in. This smells like that. That's what it smells like beer. It smells like beer is about to happen. It's pretty well carbonated. As you can see, the carbonation is collecting on the bottom of the glass there and going up. It's not much on the nose. This tastes like what I believe Budweiser should be. Like, if you took Budweiser and made it a really, really good beer, this, for all of you out there, if you like a Budweiser, especially if you're the kind of person who drinks Bud or Bud Light or, most of the macro brews, man, pick this up. Try a microbrew that is making a beer that's like that, only better, with more flavor and more attitude.
Mm-hmm.
This, the noble hops, Sam Adams, about 10 years ago, I think it was, Sam Adams put out a beer that was just called their Noble Pils. And it was a short run, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was all noble hops on it. And this has a lot of what I remember from that beer. This has a very solid malt character up front. It's not overly hoppy on the back end, except for it's got enough hops to give it a super clean finish. This is absolutely perfect for rolling down the river, sitting outside, This is absolutely delicious, and I can't stop raving on it.
I love it. I love it.
It looks fantastic.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. Well, you are checking out the Smoking and Toasting show. We're definitely going to go a little long on time today because we got more tasting to do. So I hope you can hang with us. And as we circle back around to Dan, Dan, why don't you go in with your next whiskey?
So this will be, let me just say, though, that you guys are making me awful jealous. I have no beer in my house. So I drank the last one last night. And so it's a very strange place in my reality right now that I'm having a bit of a hard time coping.
So when Dan goes to reach for a beer, what does Dan grab? What's your go-tos?
You know, it's funny. Over the last few years, my tastes, and what you're having there, my tastes have definitely gone towards Belgian wits, traditional pilsners, Belgian farmhouse ales, things like that, that I just find to be refreshing and bright. If you spend a lot, and you guys, you spend a lot of time around things that have robust palate presences, cigars, dark beers, and whiskey. Mm-hmm. So I've found that, especially, you're on the road, spend an entire day in a market talking about whiskey, drinking whiskey, hanging out in the presence of whiskey. A, the very last thing you want at the end of that is a whiskey. But B, secondarily on the palate, you're just looking for your palate to get a kind of a spa day to a certain degree. So having that sort of citrus and ginger note that hits the palate, the cleanliness, the light and brightness that you'd run into in beers like that, I've just found myself, in love with them overall. One
of the things that's like you started running through all the notes. One of the things that comes up in this is a little bit of bread, like a little. Little of that bread kind of yeasty wonderfulness.
And I'll just mention, Dan, one of the things we've discovered here on the show, and one of the reasons we like using our super high-tech sound effects of beer opening, is that I've discovered this by occasionally going back and watching an older show. If I'm not having a beer, at the moment when I hear that sound effect, like the one that Ian gave us there a moment ago, that beer opening, it is so Pavlovian. I'm like, I'll be pausing the show and going to get a beer. It's like
I'll be right back.
That's the moment where it's the sound effect that does it. It's just so interesting. But anyway, back to the whiskey.
Right. Yes, and how it looks in the glass, and it just sort of glows there in the glass and draws your imagination into it. So I'm moving on to this is again the old school Glenmorangie Sherry wood finish. Make sure that I've got that in the right place. This is bottle of 43 ABV, sees its final 2 years. Well, it saw its final 2 years in first fill Oloroso sherry cask after 10 years in a combination of first and second fill ex-bourbon oak. So before I grab that glass, I'm grabbing this Glenmorangie and taking another aromatic off of it. And what's happening here is what I tend to find happens in sherried whiskeys in particular, as they oxidize, the honey and dried fruit tends to evolve into sort of pancakes and syrup. It becomes a little more.
You said syrup, and I picked that up on mine, like right when you said it.
Yeah, there's a kind of a Denny's short stack thing happening, and that tends to me to happen as a sherried whiskey sits in the glass over the course of time. So I poured all these at the same time to try to keep some control group element happening. So this one here in the Glenmorangie glass is indeed Glenmorangie Sherry wood finish, and just kind of pulling off of thinking about how these two, the Glenkinchie here and the Glenmorangie here, contrast with one another. The worm tub, the sulfury worm tub thing that I know was part of the production of this whiskey, but no longer tastes like sulfur. It just tastes like the remnants of a savory, deep richness are definitely there. Here, floral characteristics are coming out pretty aggressively, sort of almost like a eucalyptus note coming off the nose. Nothing that to me would resemble a meatiness or a sort of an umami-ness, at least on the nose. some really, oh man, that smells damn good. And this is getting into more of those sort of grape-like aromatic essences. Cake spices, a little bit of cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, light chocolate note maybe. Drop some onto the palate and see what happens. Again, 43 ABV here. Oh man, the more of a nuttiness on the nose, cashews and macadamias on the nose. I mean, on the palate. The sweetness is balanced by a little bit of a fatty note, a little bit of a buttery note. This is sort of reminding me a lot of a really well-made pecan pie. So there's a pastry note. There's a buttery note. There's a nougaty note happening, and a nuttiness in there. Fall spices. This is. I don't need a whole lot of pumpkin pie or pecan pie, but this would be, if pecan pie was a whiskey, this would be it. It's really, really extraordinary. And it's been a while since I've had the old Sherrywood. And of course, to be fair, this has been in a bottle that's been open for several years now. So, if I had just cracked this, it might be a little bit different. The headspace in the bottle has had some effect on the vibrancy of the whiskey, certainly. But I couldn't be happier if I tried with this glass of Glenmorangie Sherrywood finish.
Dan, from your memories of the Lasanta, what are the more distinct differences between this sort of previous version and the Lasanta in terms of the flavors?
What ends up happening with today's Lasanta, the PX delivers what I think is a center palate apricot richness that kind of runs right down sort of Main Street on the palate. This one gets in there and scatters like cats all over the place. And Lasanta does that pretty well too. It's sort of anchored to this center palate ridgeline apricot sweetness, not like a cloying sweetness, but a creamy fruitiness that the PX delivers on the center palate. That this one, it's not that it lacks it, it's just more pronounced in today's Lasanta.
That's excellent.
He's really good at this. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, Dan, can you just be on the show every week?
Mm-hmm.
We'll just go.
Let's do it. That'd be great.
Good, and we'll just say whiskey good, and you can take it from there.
A couple quick fun comments on the comments section here. We got Wiki Brian commented, anybody talk to Mr. Twirlygig since we've been in quarantine? I worry about him.
Maybe Adam can join in, because he's actually in the studio taking care of these things. So Adam, if you're there, maybe you could bounce in and let us know.
And Mr. Twirlygig has been in quarantine because he's stayed at the studio this entire time. As far as I know, he hasn't been out and about at all. I think he's hunkering down.
I'm sure if he did, he would have a face mask, and it would be something to see, actually. Ian, where are you going next, brother?
Well, since we're doing 3, I brought 4, so I'm going to knock out the Balvenie, which not for any other reason than these other 2 are a little more unique than the Balvenie. And I thought it would be a little more fun. So the next one I have is the Glend Roenick. I can't give you that sound because my cork is broken.
Oh.
Hence the reason I have a wine realized my cork was broken until I brought the bottle out. Yeah. It's been a while since I've had this. This particular bottle was a birthday present for my wife a few years back. And I've been savoring this and coveting it and keeping it like safe on my shelf because every sip of this is delicious. It absolutely coats the glass. Look how dark it is too. It's crazy, like for a Scotch, how dark that is to me because a normal Scotch is a little closer to this color, which I hope you can see is a little more straw colored. little more pale yellow, and this is dark. This is dark and red to it. This has so many. You mentioned the savory earlier. This has so many of those complex savory notes. The savoriness on this reminds me of Thanksgiving dinner, kind of savory. Ooh. All those spices in the air. My mom makes a bread stuffing that has just like butter and all the different spices and everything she puts in it. And this reminds me of that right off the bat. It has a touch of that tea leaf in there as well, but a lot of fruity. Like, this is way fruitier than the Macallan that I tried earlier. This is also at let's see, this one is at 55%. So we're going up in percentage. I did line these up according to percentage, so we got, this is going up a bit. So this one's pretty hot. I smell also like the dark cherry notes. Lots of wood, like the oak wood in this is huge. I love this whiskey. The palate on this, the honey, like I don't smell the honey as much, but man, when you take a sip of this, like it hits you with this beautiful malt and honey that just, and it's so oily that you can feel it just kind of expand in slow motion across your palate. And it just keeps going. The aftertaste on this lingers for about forever, and it's absolutely delicious. It's like it's like that Thanksgiving dinner where you leave your favorite thing for the last on the plate because that's the last thing you want to taste on your palate, after you're done eating. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody but me.
Yeah, no, totally.
The retrohale on this is fruit. There's a sweetness to this it's almost like a powdered sugar kind of sweetness going on. The dark fruit flavors are a little bitter right at the end, but the sweetness just kind of rolls right through it while you're tasting that. This is one of my favorites I think I've had.
Wow.
What's interesting is if you look at if you look at how Glen Roenick is made, and you mentioned the color, the depth and the richness just in the pigmentation of it. Of course, that's going to be full maturation in that type of sherry cask. It
says Pedro Jimenez Sherry Punchin.
Okay.
So a punchin is a sort of cask, a type of cask.
It's a specific size, right? And I'll get you the specific.
And Pedro Jimenez obviously is someone who makes sherry. I take it.
It's the type of sherry. So almost all sherries are made from a single grape type called Palomino, a Spanish varietal called Palomino, except for PX or Pedro Jimenez sherries, which are derived from the grape of the same name. So Pedro Jimenez is a Spanish grape variety, and the style of sherry that's produced from it is a bit like a combination of Amarone and Sauterne. So you have a certain amount of sun-driedness going on. So the PX grapes are harvested, and then they're sun-dried to intensify the brix weight of the sugar content on the inside. So and then PXs themselves tend to be aggressively oxidized as well. So they're quite dark brown, thick, and really quite sweet. So that's generally what you can expect from PX. And puncheons, let me see if I can find that somewhere. I forget what the interior volume of a puncheon is, but it's bigger than an ASB. It's bigger than a hogshead, but smaller than a butt. If that makes any sense. And I'll look that up so that I'm not just talking straight out of my ass. But puncheon is a specific size of barrel.
Well, that would explain what you just said. It would explain the big sweetness that happens on this. This doesn't really. It has some of the especially the aftertaste notes. It has somewhat similar with the Macallan, and it has a little bit of that tea leaf kind of flavor up front, but it doesn't have as much to do with it as not. You mentioned nuttiness earlier. This has a minimal amount of nuttiness. It does have some of that tobacco flavor. Good. This one goes outstanding with the cigar that I'm having right now. Like they form like Voltron. You can actually get, like, when you go back to the cigar, you can bring in some of those dark, very bitter chocolate notes that are in the cigar. And that brings out a little more of the oak and astringency and the aftertaste of the whiskey, and it really, really marries nicely together.
What happens at? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
What happens at Glen Roenick, which I think is really interesting, is that they're aiming to put a spirit into the cask that can handle full maturation in sherry wood, whatever the sherry choice it is, typically Oloroso. They do a couple things that are really interesting. They'll distill in really short stills. I'm looking at a picture of a Glen Roenick still right now, and it's quite a short still, but it's got a little bit of a reflux ball before the swan's neck and a nice gradual decline on the line arm into a shell and tube condenser. So they're looking to shorten, but then extend a little the conversation between the copper and the spirit, and their fermentation times are damn long, between 60 and 90 hours on average. So the longer the fermentation time, the more generally the development of fruity notes in the distillate itself. So you've got an interesting contrast between the fruitiness that you're mentioning on the palate that from the sound of it isn't derived from the cask, and then that sort of married to the classic PX sherry notes, that rich, unctuous, sweet oiliness on the palate. It's a really cool. It's a really cool way to make whiskey.
This has a big mouthfeel. The other thing that keeps happening is as I'm sipping more and more of this, it gets a grapiness on the aftertaste, almost like a cognac does. Not quite as big, obviously, as a cognac, but you get a grapiness that you didn't get in the last one quite as much.
Sure, that makes sense. So, and because those grapes are sun-dried, they'd be more intensified. The inherent flavor of the fruit would be more intensified in each of the PX grapes that would then become PX sherry.
Let me be honest. If I could afford it, I would put this in a little spray bottle and just wear it as cologne. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's probably good that you don't do that, Ian, because I've got enough of a man crush on you already. And if you were to go there,
and it would just be,
it just
officer, I haven't been drinking, but I smell delicious, don't I?
So I'm going to go with a fan favorite here, or a personal favorite. So not a lot of surprises for me in this one, as you can tell by the by the amount that's left in the bottle. But this is, of course, the Glenmorangie Quinta Raban, the 12-year, aged in port cask, in ruby port casks. And I'm tempted to just say that and then say, okay, Dan, go. But I will say that on the nose, and I've taken a little more nose time with this because I was waiting to taste it until you were done talking about that, Ian. So I've spent a little more time on the nose, and what I would have maybe initially just identified as a sort of a mintiness, the more time that I spend just kind of enjoying the aroma of this, it's almost like a dark chocolate mint, if that makes it. Have you had a minty dark chocolate before, like some of those chocolate bars that you can buy in the specialty stores and stuff? That I get a lot of that. And I get a woodiness that's a little hard for me to define. Obviously, you get, the woodiness is not that uncommon in a whiskey, but I almost want to say it's like even more like an incense woodiness, like a sandalwood or something of that nature Does any of that make sense to you, Dan?
Absolutely, yeah. As a matter of fact, you've kind of stolen all my tasting notes. What I typically do in terms of the 12-year Quinta Ruban is a solid chocolate, mint, sandalwood, cedar, dark cherry, and oh golly, I'm missing at least one. There's some more fall spices happening in there, but nothing really. Quinta, even when it was a 12, didn't necessarily remind me of dried fruits so much as dark fruits. And for me, it kind of it was a little bit of an old fashioned in a glass. If you happen to drop a little bit of a blood orange into your Manhattan or into your old fashioned, you might have what comes across as, to me, Quinta Ruban. You've got an interesting astringent spiciness. You've got that hallmark Glenmorangie citrus note, but it's darker and more robust. Plum is another one that jumps out of the glass at me with Quinta 12, but then spot on where you were, sandalwood, cedar, and mint and cocoa for sure.
You said plum, and I was just trying to go with my memory of Quinta Ruban, which I finished about a month ago, and I always thought prune, just a tiny bit of that prune kind of flavor, which is not too far from plum.
Yep.
Sure. Overall, yeah.
Yep.
One of the things,
and of course,
I think is. I'm sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say with Ruby Port, like looking at that as a contrast to your Dalmore Tawny, the color is going to be different. Clearly, as Ruby Port. Yep, Ruby Port throws off a lot more of that sort of recognizable wine pigmentation, that more kind of garnety note, whereas Tawny, of course, would actually, if you didn't know it was Tawny Port, it'd be easy to mistake the color visuals of that for Oloroso sherry. So in that case, it's going to change the fruit content as well. Yeah, there you go.
Right. One of the things that's so enjoyable about this, and I remember this now from having had it before, this experience as well, is that more so than some others, and one of the reasons I love this so much is that when this gets on your palate, it's almost like it wraps itself around the palate. Some whiskeys kind of, they sit on the tongue or they impact the back of the palate. This almost feels like once you get it into your mouth, it just kind of like envelops you in a way that feels a little different from some other whiskeys. And the retrohale on this is as enjoyable as just about anything that I've ever tasted. It's just a wonderful, wonderful experience, and you're picking up these other notes, and it's some orange or tangerine maybe that you get on the retrohale. Really, this is a wonderful whiskey. Dan, remind us, what's the cost generally on a bottle of the?
If you were to buy what is now the 14-year-old Quinta Ruban in the green label, since the one that you have now is no longer in production, you'd be looking at just under $60 on the shelf, 58 or so typically in retail. And that's a bottle of 46 ABV, by the way.
And well worth it. And maybe you could speak to the differences that the additional couple of years of aging have brought to it. But I think that price for this is well worth it.
Well, and the price stayed the same when the 14 was released, so it's the same price as the 12 was.
I always tell people, since I'm doing the sherry cask over here, people ask me a lot of times, friends, family members, are like, what's a good scotch? Just if I'm going to have one scotch on the shelf. And hands down is the La Santa to me. La Santa, I think, is just, it's a beautiful, beautiful expression. It's a great price point. It's what, $60, $60 to $65, I think.
It's typically slightly lower than that. It's usually low 50s. It depends on where you buy it.
Better. Yeah, even better. And I find that it's one that I, aside from finishing mine recently, I always have it on the shelf. And it's a go-to for me. It's such a good product. And I got to be honest, the Glenmorangie 10, the original, I think is an outstanding liquid right there. That's delicious. By the way, it goes with any cigar that's in the medium to mild range. pairs incredibly well with that. So if you're an occasional Scotch drinker and cigar smoker, or a Scotch drinker and an occasional cigar smoker, that's a great one to pair with anything on the light side. Now, the real super awesome pair that I found is that original Glenmorangie and the 10th anniversary Perdomo. Like those two things, like I said earlier, they form like Voltron. But you can pair that with so many things, and the La Santa brings in, you can actually go more into the medium range because the Santa has a little fuller body overall and doesn't interrupt it. And the Quinta Raban, I find more in the medium range of cigars as well if you're doing pairing.
Yeah.
Ian, I'm sorry, Dan. Go ahead and finish up.
Oh, the point that you'd made there, I think. That first of all, I still talk to people all the time about the Perdomo 10th anniversary champagne cigar and Glenmorangie original pairing that we did on your show as being sort of the quintessential pairing that I've ever been exposed to.
It's amazing.
It's unbelievably good.
It really is, and
lighter whiskey too. So,
and it's a strong suggestion for anyone who is, for the first time, looking to try to figure out pairings of cigars and whiskey. There's almost nothing I would recommend to you more if you're trying that for the first time than that pairing, the Perdomo champagne and that whiskey. It's just such a perfect match, you know? It really is.
On every level.
Ian, let's jump back into our final beer here. You might want to get yours ready while I'm actually a little worried, to be honest with you, about the Bat Squatch, which is the
Bat
Rogue
Squatch.
Yeah, I'm worried primarily.
Do you want me to go first while you think about it?
Well, everything that I have had so far has worked so well together, and while anybody that watches the show regularly or listens knows I'm a huge fan of IPAs, I'm really worried, a bit worried about this being a palate wrecker, because I'm at such a wonderful place right now, enjoying what I've enjoyed. So yeah, maybe Ian, you go first. Why don't you? Because I have a feeling what you're bringing here is about to complement your palate perfectly.
Well, so I knew we were going for. Well, I was doing sherry scotch, finished scotch, and I knew we were doing cigars, so I picked a cigar that was going to match, most of those scotches right off the bat. Because I don't, obviously, while we're doing the show, I don't have time to just stop and go do a whiskey sniff on my whiskey cabinet in there. But I also picked a secondary beer that I knew would go with everything. And this is a go-to for me. Like, when I want a big, full Belgian triple, the Brother Polonius Belgian-style Abbey Ale, I said triple, Abbey Ale. This is an absolute. I was drinking this when they only had it in bombers, and let me tell you, a bomber at 9.4% for one person, substantial. It says it's got a picture of Polonius monk on there, and that's with permission from the monk state, by the way. Who is, by the way, I don't know if you listen to jazz. I love Polonius monk, absolutely love his music.
It ain't no Kenny G.
Also, a percentage of this supports jazz education every time you buy this.
Cool.
So
that's awesome.
Goes out to schools, and at the bottom of the bottle it says "bottled bebop."
Nice.
Which I love. So all those things aside, all those things would make me buy this in the first place. But the taste of this beer, and this, again, 9%, is pretty big. That Abbey Ale, you can see hopefully you can get the color profile there. It's
almost
red,
looks like a Scotch ale in color.
Yeah, very much. Looks very much like a Scotch ale. And it's not overly carbonated. The nose on this is all fruits. I mean, it smells like a slightly fermented fruit basket in the best way possible.
Yes.
You can, like, right off the bat, you get orange, you get cherry, you get, oh man, just so many little things in there that. What else am I getting out of that? There's that breadiness. There's it's hard to even describe how good this smells. You can smell the sweetness of it already, and the flavor is an absolute Belgian fruit bomb. It's so good across the palate. It comes across with nothing but like fruit, dried fruit, apricot I'm getting on there as well right now. And then it rolls across the tongue in the middle of the palate. It rolls across with all the, and then it hits the back of the palate, and you get this just snap of fruity goodness, almost a tangy fruity goodness, like a fruit roll up, if that makes any sense. And then it leaves a little sweetness on the palate just to remember it by. It's like a little kiss going, "Hi, remember me?" And it's all gone. And it just keeps doing that over and over again. It's not boozy, even at 9.5%. I don't find it boozy whatsoever.
Ian, I'll just mention while you're. Go ahead.
I'm listening.
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. It's that's one of the things about doing the show on Zoom is that it's the interruptions are a little bit weirder because there's a slight lag. But I apologize. Go ahead.
If you let it sit on your tongue for just a moment before you swallow, instead of just passing it through your palate, if you let it sit on your tongue, you get a little of the hoppiness and a little more of the bitter happening. And the bitter is like a bitter caramel on it. So there's a few things, like if you just drink it, it drinks one way. If you let it sit on your tongue, you get a little more aftertaste and a little more bitter caramel, a little more almost a woody kind of flavor to it, like wood chips, like the smell of fresh cut lumber. You get a little bit of that kind of, which to me is a wonderful smell, and you get a little bit of that on your palate, and you get all this fruitiness passing up. I absolutely love this, and this I truly predict is going to go amazing with the Scotch and the cigar.
Speaking of Scotch, Ian, I didn't mention this earlier, but I wanted to say when you did your last whiskey, you were mentioning that you bought it as a birthday present for your wife, and it
other way around. But yeah.
Oh, she bought it as a birthday present for you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you bought it as a birthday present for her, because I was going to say that reminded me of the episode of the Flintstones where Fred bought Wilma a bowling ball for her birthday.
Yes.
And she says, "Fred, I don't bowl. I don't want the bowling ball." He's like, "Okay, fine, I'll use it." So that's good. Dan, let's move into our final whiskey tasting here, because I have decided, Rogue makes Rogue Dead Guy Ale is one of the real treasures of beer.
It's amazing.
I'm expecting this Bat Squatch to be really good, but in the event that it is a little strong in the hoppy bitterness, I just can't bring myself to do that right now in the middle of this palate enjoyment that I'm having with everything we've done so far. So I'm actually going to save this for next week. So, so let's go now our final whiskey. Dan, what was your final selection here?
So I'm going to jump into a Bunnahabhain here in just a sec. I just went back to the Glen Kimchi, my first whiskey, and did a quick retasting. And I'd mentioned before that it had started to develop a little bit of a mapley note. The first thing that jumps out to me now in the first whiskey is a sort of a dried fruit combined with really high quality, but secondhand pot smoke. Really interesting evolution of that whiskey in there, and it kind of speaks to again that sort of meatiness of the base spirit itself. But it's such a pleasant aromatic. So anyway. Moving on to, this is the Bunnahabhain distiller, bottled at the distillery, 11-year finished in Polycortado cask. again, bottled at 55.6 ABV. So Bunnahabhain is a bit of an outlier in terms of Islay whiskeys. The bulk of its output is unpeated, and this is no exception. This is an unpeated whiskey. They do some other things that are quite interesting. They ferment in wood, but they distill in some of the tallest stills in Scotland, not the tallest. That honor goes to Glenmoe, but Bunnahabhain stills are not a whole lot shorter than that. So the copper conversation is actually quite long for the spirit as it moves through the system. So digging into this, even from an aromatics perspective, going back to that tea note, there it is. There's that sort of tea leaf thing, and I haven't cut this with water yet. The nose is black currant and tea leaf. Some really interesting sort of seaside bonfire on the beach without the smoke, just the sort of the salinity of seawater kind of a thing.
You know how you can smell that you're getting to the beach before you get there, kind of thing.
Exactly. It shows up with a little minerality on the palate and a distinctly sort of maritime presence aromatically. Oh, man. And so there it is. Let's see what happens on the palate. Wow. Now I remember why I bought this. There's a remarkable chewiness to it. The spiciness, and you would expect at 55.6, the spiciness and the alcohol prickle ting fills the mouth. It's creamy. It's velvety. It's luscious. Fudgy. There's a kind of a fudgy thing happening there. Not necessarily a straight like cocoa or baking chocolate reference, but a baked sort of a fudginess about it. Some maybe even a little bit of walnut, like walnut to black walnut happening in there as well. Dried fruits, sure, some dried fruits happening, but it isn't like a typical Oloroso stamp of medjool dates. It doesn't necessarily carry that kind of luggage around with it. Because it's 55.6, I'm gonna cut it just a tiny bit to see what happens, and then jump back in. It's all viscous as hell in there. Ooh, dang! Wow, that switches up the aromatics quite a lot, shifting it more towards sort of the driftwood and seaside elements. Oh, bloody hell! Oh, there's nothing. We were talking a little bit a while back about what PX might bring to the equation, whether it's through the new La Santa or the one that we were talking through earlier. That center palate ridgeline apricot sweetness is not there. Polycartato is going to be oxidized, so you're going to expect some of the nuttiness to show up, but the overt or enhanced sweetness level is certainly not there. This has tremendous depth to it. If I could, I would tell everybody to run right out and buy it, but you've got to go to the distillery. So run once the global quarantine is lifted, run to Bunnahabhain and check it out. The distillery is being renovated as we speak. Loads of money getting dumped into that well-deserving distillery that actually had been kind of falling down around their ears for many years. Bunnahabhain is in the process of rising from its own ashes, and I've always loved their whiskeys across the board, particularly the more aggressively matured ones. But this, at 11 years old, is a showstopper. Really, really just a brilliant whiskey.
Is this an expression that you tasted while you were at the distillery and then decided you had to have a bottle?
Yep. So it just sits there. It's a distillery exclusive, cask strength distillery exclusive. And so you get a chance at the end of the tour to try a few of the things that they have that are distillery only bottlings, and bottle your own. Quite a number of them actually, and this one, and there was one other that I own that I think is a peated Bunnahabhain. jumped out at me as being just really extraordinary. And I'm now remembering how much and why I fully fell in love with this whiskey. There's a tiny bit of a freshly struck match note, a little bit of a sulfur note. Not aggressive though, and it's probably more coming from the Palo Cortado cask than it is from the distillate itself. But really, just beautiful.
It's funny you say that, because who doesn't enjoy lighting a match and that light little just sulfur smell?
That quick hit.
Yep. We all kind of enjoy that.
It's a secret obsession. It's still like the smell of gasoline to me, if I had to admit it. I love that smell, and I'm not quite sure, but I always have since I was a kid. I love that smell.
The slightest whiff of it, because it has a sweetness to the smell and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can get too much of that. That's for sure.
Some great comments coming in on the feed. One from Wiki Brian, who says that Dan is definitely upping the alcohol review game. So thanks for that, Dan. He also mentioned in your last whiskey, you said it had a eucalyptus note, and he says, I wouldn't know a eucalyptus note if it reached out and slapped me.
It's a bit like if you just buried your nose in potpourri. The predominant scent in most sort of traditional potpourris is dried eucalyptus leaf. They look like little wafers basically, and they have a real distinct smell to them. I noticed that Brian also posted the size of a puncheon, so thank you, Brian, for that. That's great.
Yeah, yes. Also, want to say hi to Trey Boring, our resident cigar legal expert here for the show, who's watching.
That guy's awesome.
My good friend from school, Steve Richardson. Steve, what's up? I haven't talked to you in way too long. There's also a comment here from Bruce Stark, who says, Ian, you should get a Lazy Susan for your table. So
just turn the whole table.
Might want to think about that while we're
as a table. Yeah, that'd be good.
Mr. Twirligood.
Then I would have to wait for my ashtray to come around so I could tip my cigar.
Yeah, well, Ian, where are you going for your final whiskey, brother?
Final whiskey, I'm going to do the Avalor, the Abunda, and as far as I know, this is the cask. Yeah, bottled straight from the cask at 60.1%. So as you've noticed, I'm going bigger percentage each time. This one does not have a broken cork, so we're going to go.
Oh, very nice.
There we go. Let me grab one of my little sifters here. This one is not as dark as the Glend Roenick, but I don't think you'd have to get pretty extreme to get darker than that. This is darker than normal though, and quite red. More red than brown, I think. This one has a smell like, this is like, if you go, what does a good Scotch whiskey smell like?
Mm-hmm.
This has all of that. It has the fruity notes, big fruity notes. Like that's the first thing it hits. It's dried fruit. It has dark cherry. It has a little raisin in there. Raisin or date, those are kind of two that are real similar that it's hard for me to kind of tell the difference between the two.
When I think
it has, you can smell the minerality of the water that goes into it as well. There's a little on the nose of the oak and a little of the char that you get from the oak, which I didn't detect in the other on the nose in the other whiskeys, but this you can smell that char just a little bit, like if you've been camping and you wake up the next morning and that fire's gone out, but you can smell the fire pit. You can smell that char kind of from the fire pit.
Sort of wonderful smoldery smell.
Yeah, if you haven't been burning crappy wood. This smells, and it has an oaky smell right off the bat. Like all those things are jumping out at me right from the top, along with the whole malty profile. I'm trying to get as good at this as Dan, by the way. I don't have as many adjectives, I
think. I was just going to say, Ian, when you were talking about that sort of pure Scotch aroma, that makes me think of just a good solid Balvenie. That to me is like when you do that on the nose, that to me is what Scotch smells like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This on the first sip. So first off, I'm gonna point out that this is 60.1%, and that heat. You can taste that heat right off the bat, not in an unpleasant way, but it is there. You know you're drinking a whiskey right there. It's a little thinner mouthfeel than you would expect from all those things, but look at the oiliness. If you can catch the oiliness on the glass, I mean, it clings to the glass like crazy. So when you take a sip, it hits you with that heat and that fruit and everything, and then it starts to spread across, and as it spreads across, the whole palate starts to pick up more of the woody notes that are going on in there. This has a little bit of smokiness to it that really makes me super happy as well. What are you doing?
I don't know if you got that or not, but all right. This is the single malt from the Isle of Arran.
I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of that.
Yeah, it is their port cask finish. And by the way, just as I'm pouring this, I want to put up this note because this Saturday, 1 p.m. Central Time, we'll be doing our second Smoking and Toasting virtual smoke fest on Zoom. And so here is...
Did we put up an invitation for that yet?
No, but I will this afternoon. And,
all right.
And then we'll post the information on the Smoking and Toasting Facebook page, so you can come back there and find it, or you can take a screenshot of this.
If you're watching this, yes, take a screenshot right now so you have everything you need to get on there. We had a blast last week. There was 2 weeks ago, there was a little snafu in when it was happening, but we've got this all locked up now, and we're going to do the virtual cigar fest again Saturday, 1 o'clock.
And we're calling it Cigar Fest, but we certainly encourage you to bring something interesting to drink to your Zoom app and share that with us as well. So, and even if you don't smoke cigars, if you want to just join us for a little chat and drink something, please do.
Absolutely. And if you have a few bottles of whiskey, you can always bring your bottles out, start your cigar, and then do a whiskey sniff.
That's right. That would be fun, too. We can do a virtual whiskey sniff. So the Arran malt is a single malt that initially matures in traditional oak casks, and then it was selected by the master distiller at the Arran Distillery to be finished in port wine casks that were selected from or sourced from, they just say, a prestigious producer of Portuguese fortified wine. So they don't tell us exactly where it comes from, although I wouldn't be surprised if Dan knows.
I don't, but I would like to.
Put you on the spot. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, Dan. I'm sorry. Wow, this is first of all, on the nose, it comes across a little stronger, maybe, than the last two that I've had. A little more of that sort of intense Scotch whiskey aroma to it, but still a lot of fruitiness. I'm going to even say there's definitely honey, but I'm getting like a plum or date sort of a vibe from the nose. Very, very good on the nose. I'm going to say it's elevated my expectations a little on this one. So let me just give it a try here. Wow. It is velvety smooth. Maybe even a little smoother than the Quinto Raban. It doesn't envelop the palate the same way that one does. It's a little thinner on the mouthfeel, but the flavors are just so distinct. Honey, I mentioned it was on the nose, is there. There's even a little grapefruit. Wow, it's it's not as porty as the other two. I'm instead getting a little more citrus and the sort of dried fruit date vibe is there. It's maybe not as rich, but it's extremely flavorful. Extremely flavorful. Very interesting.
Can you remind me what that bottling strength was?
I want to say it's 50%. Let me look back again. It is 50% alcohol by volume. So
50. Okay.
And it is. Trying to see if there's any other information here. They say on the bottle, luscious flavors of hazelnut, strawberry jam, which yes, I can pick up some of that in there. Mandarin oranges and a balance of flavor. They say between the port cask and the Aran malt. It is definitely fruitier than the Aran 18, and obviously from the port finishing, you would maybe expect that, but it's definitely fruitier than that. But what I'm most surprised at is it's not just those darker port fruit kind of flavors, the grapiness and the date. It's got a really pleasant citrus to it that is more prominent than what I expected.
And I'm just looking at the color, and it looks. If I had to guess, I would guess that the finish isn't necessarily the longest finish in history. It's a bit like what happens at Balvenie with 21-year Portwood. It's only a 4-month finish at the end. Just looking to hit it with just a subtle shading, and that one kind of strikes me as maybe the same concept. I couldn't tell you for sure, and I love what the guys at Aran are doing, but that one, just based on what you're telling me and the visuals of it, I'd imagine that being a relatively short finish by finishing standards.
Yeah, short to medium, definitely not as long as the first two. And maybe the reason I would describe it as short is it's a more dry finish, almost like a really, really good red wine.
Yeah.
That just has that kind of shorter but very dry pleasantness to the finish. This is actually, and of course the Kimchi I've had before, and the other, but this is definitely the most surprising. If you were to say to me, here's 3 port cask whiskeys, this would easily be the one I'm the most surprised by in terms of the way that it tastes and finish. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's absolutely delicious. It really is. Does make it hard. I mean, easy to contrast with the others. Does make it hard to really pull out a favorite because they've all got such a rich difference to them. The first one that I had, the Dalmore, darker, more dark fruity. The Quinta doing that wonderful enveloping thing, and then this having this just really, really wonderful on the tongue taste to it that is so pleasant. So, wow,
very nice.
Ian, can you pick a favorite from what you tried today?
I can. That Glend Roenick was amazing.
Yeah.
And the Glend Roenick 17, and I've got this much left, and I don't think I'll ever have another bottle of it. And it's amazing, and I'm just going to covet that last little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the special occasion.
Now that you've been through all 3 of them, Dan, your favorite from the day, is there a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. These were so different, and I had a feeling they would be. They're so different from each other that it's hard to choose a favorite. The Bunnahabhain, I think the Bunnahabhain is probably one that is a standout to me, mostly because I was there when I picked it. So there's a connection. Right. There's a time. I've got a connection to Glenmo, but the Bunnahabhain was my first visit to Bunnahabhain. It was a really nice day. We had a blast. We had about 1,000 whiskeys when we were there, and so when I had a chance to try this one, it was just a mind scrambler, and I'm just right back there at Bunnahabhain in my head, kind of drinking through this. So this one gets my nod. The other 2 are outstanding in their own way. And I forgot to mention, you had asked about the difference between Quinta 12 and 14, and I forgot to address that. The extra 2 years just lengthens the conversation. I think you'd even mentioned when you were tasting through the Quinta 12 that it sits in the center palate, and it tells its story in the center palate, and that's kind of where its world lives. But Quinta 14 is a little bit, it's the same basic story told with a bit more patience and a couple extra chapters at the end. It's a beautiful dram. And the Quinta 12 was my favorite of our finishes. The Quinta 14 to me is not a quantum leap by any means, but a surface of the moon-sized step in an extraordinarily right direction.
Dan, before we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you, we've talked a bit about this on the show in past weeks, that the craft beer industry is facing perhaps its largest challenge so far, because so much of the advancements that the craft beer industry has made in the last year to 2 years have been the opening of these wonderful, very boutique-y, smaller breweries that do the majority of their business, either from people coming and drinking there, or from maybe being in a few bars in the neighborhood, or from people coming to the brewery and taking some home with them. Obviously, a lot of that is shut down. All of the bars are shut down. All of the breweries are shut down in terms of being able to go sit there and enjoy some different beers. And I've seen numbers this last week that estimate the lowest number, I think, was 48% of them may not make it if they're shut down for more than about 3 more weeks. And the numbers climb from there to as high as like 70-something%. Wow. My sense is that the spirit industry is not being impacted in nearly as dire a way, but I thought maybe you could speak to that a little bit based on your perspective.
And I think it's probably analogous to what's happening in the craft beer industry. The bigger the producer, the more they're able to absorb what's going on currently. And so you're going to definitely, across the globe in terms of craft distillation, you're going to see some real, unfortunately, it's going to get decimated in some pretty tragic ways, particularly small producers in the EU or in the UK who are trying to get their goods into the US in really uncertain economic times, and paying and having to pass on the tariff on top of that. Are really, I mean, what's happening with Glenmorangie is there's still today's shelf price is still not reflective of the U.S. import tariff. It will be someday, but for now, it's a big enough company that cost has not been passed on. With smaller companies that cannot absorb that, they're already dealing with smaller operations, with smaller operating budgets, with not quite as deep a pockets. And they're not publicly traded, so on the plus side, they don't have those people to keep happy, but they also don't have the financial resources to absorb things like this. So globally, I think you're going to see some real attrition kick in. Domestically, in terms of American craft distillers, there are going to be some closures, unfortunately, for sure, and I think that's probably going to run into 30%. Of the folks in the micro distilling subculture of distillation here in the U.S. will probably have to shutter permanently, or at least for a long period of time, or get bought out or sold or sell off their maturing product or whatever it is that they've got to do. But what we've seen so far in terms of consumption is that there's quite a lot of demand in the off-premise side of things, whether that's in states where it's legal, selling distilled spirits to grocery stores. Certainly what we've seen, and I think what other suppliers around the country have seen, is a fairly significant uptick in e-trade and home delivery. So the kinds of things, the kinds of bumps that we're seeing from the Drizzly app and so on and so forth have been really, really encouraging. And we were talking before the show about how this is really not a golden age, but it's certainly a sea change in how whiskey is marketed, how whiskey is purchased even. And I think when we get past this and return to whatever the new normal is, there are chunks of this that will stay with us. The viability of e-commerce, the viability of home delivery, and not that it favors distilled spirits, but distilled spirits are more shelf stable. You don't have to worry so much about stock rotation and so on and so forth. And you can deliver them in the back of a Fiat or whatever, and it doesn't matter. So I think the distilled spirits industry is a bit more robust than the fermented beverages industry is in terms of global recessions and this sort of global quarantine stuff. But there will still be some unfortunately some producers, distillers and producers that just don't survive it.
We want to encourage anyone to, if you have the opportunity, to support some of the small guys, whether it's on the spirit side or particularly when it comes to craft beer. If you are at a Specs or a Total Wine or wherever you shop and you are picking up, some beers, we want to encourage you. This is a great time to not go with not only the macro brews, but if you are aware that a particular craft brewery is owned by a macro brewery, we call it macro craft. This is a good time to not buy those. Those guys are going to be okay. They're going to make it, even if you like their beer and have no issue supporting them. Yeah. This is a good time to support someone that is truly independent, because those are the guys that need your help the most in getting through this time.
There's a lot of breweries now that are doing like a drive-through service. You can order it, pre-order it, you can call, you can tell them what you want, or you can drive up and say hi like this. They'll bring it out to you. They'll put it in your car. All you got to do is drive by them. A lot of breweries here in Houston are doing that. There's also, I want to point out, like the restaurant business is doing a lot of what I dubbed last week the take and shake, where if you want a good mixed drink and you don't have a whole lot of if you don't have a whole lot of a bar at your house, you can go get all the ingredients for what I call a take and shake, where they give you everything you need for the mixed drink that you want, and you take it home and you just combine the ingredients, shake it up, and there you go. You've got your whatever you're looking for, your old fashioned, your Manhattan, your like whatever you want.
And you're an instant cocktail master. You can say to someone, "Look what I made."
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Speaking of shout outs, the thing that I was going to bring up about the small distillers is that you're seeing loads of them around the world, and particularly here in the U.S., that have been switching their production to hand sanitizer, and even some of them won't survive this, and then donating it. So, a massive shout out to these people who are, who may be financially circling the drain, but still stepping up and responding to that call. So, there's a tremendous amount of, no pun intended, but a tremendous amount of spirit in the micro distilling community. And I'm, on behalf of everybody who's dealing with all of this quarantine stuff, they just can't be thanked enough for what they've done in terms of trying to make sanitizer and keep everybody out there more safe, particularly first responders. So kudos to those guys.
Well, there's a lot of people like Whitmire's here in town has donated thousands and thousands of gallons. And here's what's going to happen is they're not that much financially viable than anybody else, but they're going to need you to buy their product as well. So those guys are donating out of their pocket. They're not asking for you to come out and just buy their stuff. But if you go by one of the places and get a free bottle of hand sanitizer, like a lot of them are doing, or you have a distillery in the neighborhood,
it's a perfect time to jump in and support those guys.
Absolutely,
it really is. So. Dan, I want to thank you for making the show so viable today, bringing us, such a great perspective on these whiskeys. We've not done this kind of a tasting before, and I really enjoyed it. And I feel like I know a whole lot more about tasting and about the various kinds of casks and the way that the different distillers use them and what the results are from the show today. So, very educational show. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of it. And thank you to everyone who has been a part of. I think we may have lost Ian right at the end. Oh, there he is. Ian, you're back just in time to toast us out, my friend. Thank you again, Dan, for being on the program. And we'll be back next week. And don't forget to join our virtual Smoke Fest on Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Time. The info will be on our Facebook page, and we'll look forward to having you there. So I appreciate everyone for hanging with us for a fun show today. Thank you. And Ian, if you can grab something to toast us out with, we'll just say cheers.
Sorry, I got to run out of batteries.
Ian and Chris, thank you so much.